CNS, also known as the central nervous system. Now, the CNS is made up of the brain and spinal cord. The brain communicates to the rest of the body through the spinal cord and allows messages to be passed from the body to the brain, as well as from the brain to other parts of the body, which leads to a response. The brain processes information from the senses and then is responsible for controlling the body's behaviour that may result from this information. Cells in the central nervous system are neurons. A neuron is a nerve cell that processes and transmits information through electrical and chemical signals in the nervous system. This is a picture of a neuron. I don't think you're going to get asked how to label a neuron. However, I think you may get asked the function of a dendrite or nucleus or cell body. So I will tell you what their functions are now. So dendrites are at the far end of the neuron. They receive messages from other neurons in order to trigger an action potential within the cell. It carries electrical impulses from previous neurons towards the cell, and it's connected to other dendrites. Next you have the axon. The axon is the long bit of the neuron. It's a long branch from the cell body that passes electrical impulses down the end of the neuron to allow it to communicate with others. If you were to label it, it's that long yellow strip there. Next you've got the terminal buttons. They connect vesicles that store neurotransmitters. The axon terminal receives a message from other neurons, and this is at the far end opposite the dendrites. It receives messages from other neurons in order to trigger an action potential within the cell. It carries electrical impulses from previous neurons towards the cell. The cell body holds genetic information. It's where the part of the nucleus sits and contains cell nucleus, which houses genetic material for that particular neuron. It contains other material which allows the cell to function, for example, mitochondria for energy. The axon hillock attaches the axon to the cell body. The myelin sheath is a fatty layer that protects the axon and increases the speed of transmission. The nodes around there are gaps between the myelin sheath, which increase transmission as it is forced to jump between the gaps. I like to think of it as bunny hops between the gaps of the myelin sheath, and therefore that's why if you have increased layers of myelin sheath, it increases the speed of action potential because it forces the jumps more. Finally, Schwann cells. They surround the neurons and secrete myelin sheath. You also have to know the process of synaptic transmission. Synaptic transmission is when messages are passed through the body through neurons. Shown above is a picture of it. It's good to know the labels of this. You have the presynaptic neuron, that's pre the synapse. You have the postsynaptic neuron, that's after the synapse. You have the synaptic cleft, that's in the middle of the synapse. And you have the vesicles, they are filled with neurotransmitters. And you have the vesicle button, and that is at the end of the neuron. And you have receptors on the postsynaptic neuron that collects the neurotransmitters which are released from the vesicles. It's good to know how to label this, because when in your exam when you need to explain this, you can draw it, label it, annotate it, and then explain it. So you need to know the process of synaptic transmission. This normally comes up as a 3 marker. 1. An action potential gets sent through the action hillock towards the terminal buttons where vesicles are located which are filled with neurotransmitters. 2. Once a message reaches the action calcium channels and opens and releases calcium ions. 3. Calcium ions triggers the release of vesicles. The vesicles will fuse with the outer membrane of the terminal button, releasing the neurotransmitters into the synaptic cleft. Receptors on the postsynaptic neuron will then absorb the appropriate amount of neurotransmitters through the lock and key method. Any neurotransmitters that are not absorbed by the postsynaptic cleft will be destroyed by enzymes in the synaptic cleft or will be absorbed by the presynaptic neuron by the uptake. Absorbed molecules will be destroyed by enzymes to turn off the neurons in preparation for future action potentials. Once the message reaches the axon, calcium channels open and release calcium ions. Now that is a lot to remember, and it was a lot of information, so here's the important things. An action potential reaches the synapse. That leads to the release of calcium. The release of calcium leads to the vesicles being opened on the presynaptic neuron, which leads to them going across the synaptic cleft, which leads to them getting absorbed by the receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. That was a very quick and shortened way to explain how you could shorten this down. However, please do shorten this down, as this is a very in-depth explanation of the process of synaptic transmission, and you already have a lot to remember. Action potential is a nerve impulse that passes down the neuron to stimulate the release of neurotransmitters, which is triggered by a change in an electrical potential. A neuron is at rest at minus 70 volts, which leads to a cell being negatively charged. When a neuron is activated by a stimulus inside the cell, it becomes positively charged, which is at minus 55 volts. Negatively charged means there's less potential for an action potential, which is an inhibitory state. A positively charged means that there's more chance for an action potential, which is an excitatory state. Action of neurotransmitters. Dopamine has been related to emotion and cognitive function, as well as posture and control of movement. It has also been associated with the reinforcement in learning, as well as the dependency in addictions. Dopamine is used in hormone regulation, such as controlling the menstrual cycle. Serotonin is associated with mood control, particularly in the limbic system. It is involved with many other functions, such as feeling pain, sleep, and regulating body temperature and hunger. Noradrenaline is associated with emotion, particularly mood control. Noradrenaline is involved with sleeping, dreaming, and learning. Acetylcholine stimulates muscle contractions and has key function in motor control and movement. It's also necessary for memory and other cognitive functions such as attention and wakefulness and alertness. Acetylcholine is also involved in expressing some emotions such as anger and sexuality.